Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men have asked me for the right words to say to be more attractive, desirable, and more of a leader. And I've found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines. Because at the root of a connected and affectionate relationship and being more effective and inspiring at work is your ability to influence others. But most often, influence is not gained or lost with words. It's from what I call the invisible factors. So I created a quick guide for you called 3 Ways Men Lose Influence at Work and with Women, so you can understand how these invisible factors work and what has women and colleagues both more inspired to say yes. I think you're also going to be surprised to find out the moment when your influence actually begins. So grab the guide for free at shanajamescoaching.com/3ways. That's shanajamescoaching.com/3 and the word ways, WAYS. Or you can text ALIVE to 44144. That's the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144. I hope you enjoy the guide and this episode. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm excited today to be here to talk about leadership blind spots and also organizational and company culture. And my guest, Russ Elliott, welcome, Russ.
Good to be here. Good to be with you.
Yeah, has been working in this realm for 30 plus years in HR and business and guiding leaders internally and externally through their leadership challenges. And, I'll give him a little bit more of an intro in a moment. But what I want to say about this topic is leadership shows up in so many different ways in our lives. And we're going to focus mainly on organizational and company or business leadership. But I also suggest listening for how this can apply in your life outside of work. And one of the things that men often come in and say to me, whether this is clients, friends, whatever, often some of the most stressful parts of work include leadership or being led and the conflicts that happen in this realm. So, Russ, I'm really excited to have you here today to talk about this and to dive into your decades of wisdom.
Okay, let's go.
Great. Okay, so for a quick bio, for those of you who have not heard of Russ, he's an expert on organizational culture and is the founder of the Conscious Culture Group, a consulting and executive coaching company committed to building sustainable and effective intentional cultures. So he works closely with leaders and partners with forward-thinking organizations to identify and eliminate the gaps between the leadership's vision of culture and the employee experience, which creates high engagement through conscious culture. And as I said, Russ has been in the field for more than 30 years. He's on the faculty of different organizations and schools and has had articles published in national magazines. So again, thank you for being here. And let's really dive in with the blind spots around leadership. What are, as you've worked in the field for all of these years, what do you see are the biggest blind spots leaders have?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does vary per leader. So what is a blind spot? Let's start with that.
Great.
Yeah, and so with what a leadership blind spot is that when I show up, when I participate as a leader, people are seeing things that I as a leader am not aware of. Mm-hmm. It may be my language, it may be my body language, voice language, it may be my style, leadership style. And so blind spots are it's areas where we have unintentional impact. And so it's really important when leading to understand not only your intentional impact, and if that's being received, but your unintentional impact as well.
Yeah. So important, right? I mean, I would think that's a huge part of whether or not you're effective as a leader.
Yeah, and we all have blind spots, human beings in all kinds of relationships, and that applies to leaders at work as well. And so there are different tools that we could use to help understand what those blind spots are. And executive coaching is usually tied to developing and minimizing the negative impact of the blind spots.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, okay. So what's a common blind spot that leaders have that they, you walk in and you can see it and they do 360s and their team sees it, but they're not really aware of?
Yeah, an example would be that a leader's voice tone, for example, could be having an unintended impact of people not responding, being quiet, having some fear around it. And they have no idea that their voice tone is being received that way.
Mm.
So sometimes if that shuts people down and they become aware, oh, my voice tone, I had no idea that was shutting people down, that it's perceived and felt like it's an angry tone.
Uh-huh.
People become defensive. And so that's an example. It may be that language that a leader uses has an unintended impact of creating some shame, and that shuts people down.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important to understand what these blind spots are to be a more effective leader.
Uh-huh. And so do these leaders come to you realizing, oh, people aren't speaking up around me, or people are getting defensive, and they just don't know why?
Yeah, the leaders that approach me are curious about these things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is, they know as a leader, they have enough maturity as a leader to understand that they know what they know, and then there's a box of I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And they enter from a place of curiosity. By the time I engage with them as an executive coach, it's like, okay, so I'm ready for this. Not everybody is ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
People I work with are ready to understand. They're curious about how they're impacting others.
Yeah. And how do you help these leaders get a better understanding of that unintentional impact?
Yeah, the common method that I use, there are different ways of understanding it. One is an electronic 360. That is, the boss, peers, direct reports, and the individual fill out an electronic 360 on a series of competencies. And then there's some open-ended questions. And so those are compared to national scores. So you get a sense of how are you being received by peers, direct reports, and boss. Does it vary?
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, my experience is that leaders may be a strong manager, but it may be with the peers that there are some issues, or with the manager there's some issues. So an electronic 360 is one way. The other way is doing some deep dive 1-hour interviews with select people, boss, typically a couple of peers, and some direct reports. And that deep dive then really helps understand and give a better sense of how the leader is impacting others.
Yeah. And then how do you help them make a shift, right? Because sometimes seeing it is enough, and sometimes it's more of a, wow, okay, I don't know how to change my tone of voice, or, I imagine it's quite vulnerable to get that feedback and then be trying to make those changes.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the vulnerability. It can be scary and intimidating when people see the results. As human beings, what we tend to do is what's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? Instead of looking at the strengths. So what I do is I have an initial 3 or 4 hour session with them, going over all the assessments that we use, and say, okay, let's identify and understand the strengths that got you where you are.
Uh-huh.
We want to make sure that you continue to move forward on those strengths.
Mm-hmm. And recognize, right? Yeah, to see them in yourself and not just make all the other stuff now the problem, to highlight the problem.
Right. And so some
Mm-hmm.
leaders go, yeah, that's, yeah. And then they want to move on. Wait a second here. Wait a second. I want to spend some time really understanding the strengths.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So it's them to see what they see. I share what I see. And we talk about identifying key strengths that there are people really appreciate about the leader. And then we end up picking 2 or 3 patterns that are not helping them get to where they want to go.
Mm.
Those patterns usually pop up. It becomes pretty obvious what it is. And then we say, okay, we're going to put a development plan together. We're going to create what are the specific competencies you want to develop?
Mm-hmm.
What are the behaviors that are going to shift? And then I like creating a from to state. So the from state, and the to state is what would it look like if you were successful in 4, 5, 6 months.
So for like the example you gave around someone whose tone of voice instills fear or has people feel ashamed, that would be the from.
Yeah, that would be the from state. And so where it really gets interesting is in the beginning, where I just ask them, I give them homeworks after each coaching session. And one homework could be, all I want you to do for the next 2 weeks is observe yourself. How do we bring it from unconscious to conscious?
Yes.
How do we have you understand the impact that you are having?
Yes. I love this. I mean, it's so similar to what I do with men. Sometimes I do it in the leadership realm, and often I do it in the relationship realm too. And I really just have men walk around and notice, right? How are people responding to me? And, what's the impact I'm having on people? Because they often, like you said, it often is unconscious. We have to start watching it and being willing to be uncomfortable to then be conscious of the impact we're having on people.
Yeah, and it requires, as you mentioned earlier, it requires a lot of trust, because there is vulnerability. Wow, I have a lot of pride that I am a good leader. And there's truth to it. There's many ways, many areas, many competencies that they are a good leader. And how do you level yourself up? How do you have more impact, the impact that you want to have? I also talk with leaders around leadership purpose. How do you define what your leadership purpose is?
Oh, I like that. What is the leadership purpose?
Yeah, leadership purpose is a statement that says, this defines me as a leader. And so I work with leaders on creating that. For example, the one that I work with, and I do believe it's always a work in progress. But for me, the statement that I have currently is, I lead from a curious mind and heart, caring about the success of both the people and the organization in an engaging manner. And so whenever I do work, I'm always looking back to say, am I meeting my purpose? Am I aligned to who I want to be? And when that purpose is created, then you share that with your direct reports, you share that with others, and you create some accountability around that. So
for yourself with them.
That's right.
Yeah.
So for example, if it's important to be engaged in a supportive manner, and my direct reports are not seeing that, not feeling that, I want them to let me know that I am not on purpose. I am not following my leadership purpose. Yeah, and so it's part of the work is, what is your leadership purpose or your vision, and let's keep moving towards that.
I like it. So, and I'm hearing that leadership purpose, right? It's different than your executive purpose or your work purpose, right? You're there for a certain reason to accomplish something, but the leadership purpose is actually about more around your style and how you're engaging with people.
That's right. It's who you are personally as a leader. How do you want to show up as a leader? And so when you ask that question of leaders and they haven't thought about it, they go, I really don't know.
Yeah.
What would that look like? That's an interesting question.
Yep.
And once it's defined and flushed out, and you keep revising it, you keep tuning it up so that, oh yeah, this really feels better. And then that really helps them to stay on target on the leader that they want to become over time.
I love it. And I'm wondering too, okay, so for someone listening, what would that first step be if they wanted to clarify even right now, what is my leadership purpose?
Yeah. So a great place to start is write down some adjectives, that describe who you are and what you're about and how you want to show up. Just write down free flow, brainstorm words that could fit in to that purpose, and start with something, knowing that it's not a final state. Research other examples of leadership purpose and go, oh, I like that idea. I like that one. And I like that one. And you keep modifying it and you keep working at it. So each of your listeners can take a shot at it and say, when I show up at work, how do I want to show up? And it may be that they're not managing others. Just as an individual, we're all leaders. We all influence.
Oh, I love that. I love that point too, right? We're all leaders. Even if you're being led by someone else, you can lead from the bottom or lead from the group. Everybody, in the group is a leader. And I would imagine that the more clarity you have around your own leadership purpose, the more likely you are to step into being a leader, who's noticed and respected in that way too.
That's right. Noticed and respected. And people know, if you're managing others, people know what to expect from you, and they hold you accountable to that standard.
Uh-huh.
And it's a journey. I have my own take is you never fully get there.
Well, that feels freeing in a way, because if if you realize that you'll never fully get there, you're not, putting that pressure on yourself to be perfect. And then you're always willing to grow in that way.
Yeah, leadership is a life journey. Being a partner is a life journey. And there's always more that we can do. And we're imperfect human beings that slip up once in a while.
Yes.
Knowing what the target looks like, whether it's as a leader at work, whether it's in relationship, all of that helps to identify, who am I? How do I want to be in the world? How do I want to be in the world as a leader?
Those are powerful questions. Very simple and powerful.
Yes, they can be. Yeah. And so I recommend listeners be thinking about that a little bit and say, let me give that some time. Let me give that some reflection. You can ask people around, your listeners can have people around them, ask them the question, how do you see me as a leader?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Start collecting information from others.
Right. And I like that too. How do you see me as a leader? What are my strengths? And what would you suggest? Or if you were being led by me, or, that you might be being led by me, what in some of the workshops I used to lead, we'd often do, okay, what do you appreciate and what do you want more of? Right. So what else do you see as possible, or what do you want more of from me?
Right. Exactly. And so people may, depending on the relationship and the trust with others, they may share, they may not share.
Yeah.
The advantage of using somebody from the outside is that they share everything with the outside. Because then what's collected are themes, not what any one person said. But here are some themes of what people said that they want. They're giving their gift of time to give you feedback, and here's what they want you to hear.
Right. I like that too. Then it's not as personal. So, okay, as you're talking to, I'm, knowing that you are a culture expert, organizational culture, company culture. How does the individual leadership style or blind spots tie into this culture or conscious culture?
Yeah, so let me define conscious culture, because it could have different definitions. And the way I've defined it is intentional culture. So we've just been talking about intentional leadership purpose, right? So the same is true for organizational culture. That too often, and I imagine this is true for a lot of your listeners, is that the culture of the organization is not defined. It's everybody's creating their own story of what it is. And even if the leaders have defined it, my experience, both 32 years in HR as well as a consultant coach, is that there's a disconnect between what the leaders want and the employee experience.
Yep.
And so a big part of the work is building that bridge between the two. So we ask the leaders, what's your vision of the culture? What do you see? What are your intentions? What are your desires? And then we ask employees in confidential ways, tell us what the employee experience is about.
Ooh, interesting.
And so like we build the bridge with the individual leader on feedback, we build the bridge on the organizational view as well, between the employee experience and what the leadership desires.
I was talking to an executive recently who said, overall, he thought they had a really great company culture, but he could see moments where the women in the organization may feel left out, or kind of there's more of like a, bro talk or man talk or things like that. And so, right, it's interesting. It's interesting that, he was noticing that. And I would think some leaders might notice some of that, some leaders might not. And then to really hear what your company is saying to you, or what your employees are saying to you, again, that seems really vulnerable too.
It is. And employees really have a great desire to do it if they know, at least initially, if they know that their information is going to be part of a larger collective base of information, then they desire to contribute to it. In an organization, when they're further through the process, people are much more willing to share directly. But initially, People are a
And then I'm
little
just thinking too, some of the listeners, work for other people, and we could hopefully speak to that too, like how they might start to initiate a conversation around conscious culture.
Yeah, and so depending on their role in the organization, so culture, there's really several levels of it. Let's take the larger view, the whole organization. And so at the end of the day, there needs to be conversations with the leaders, the top leaders, and if they're in that situation, be part of that dialogue that says, okay, culture matters. I interviewed 10 people. I got 10 different answers. Here's what I got. I don't think that's in line with what we're trying to achieve. Let's gain some clarity on the culture itself. Let's create a conscious culture. On the smaller level, that is within a team, you can have conversations about how do we want to behave with each other.
Uh-huh.
How do we, for example, want to be able to provide honest feedback in respectful ways? If that's what we want, and that's often a key to successful teams, if that's what we want, let's build our skill in that. Let's declare it and build our skill in that. And let's continually get better at providing each other honest feedback. When you have that, and trust is required in order to be able to really go there. When you build up the trust and you're able to provide solid feedback on a regular basis, and people sit back and say, oh, you're providing me feedback, you're giving me a gift of your time, and you're doing it for my behalf. So my only job is to understand what that feedback is, whether I agree or disagree.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so that's an example of something that can occur even within a team.
Wait, say that again. So your only job, you said, is to figure out whether you agree or disagree?
No, your only job, yeah, thanks for clarifying. Your only job is to listen to it, not to
Okay, that's what I thought.
Not to go back and judge it.
Yeah.
But really the most powerful 3 words that go on in feedback when receiving feedback is tell me more.
Uh-huh.
When you say tell me more, you're demonstrating that you want to know.
Yes.
And that is your job when receiving feedback. When you're providing feedback, it's also a skill, is making sure that there's some basis for it. It's not just out of an emotion. It's not based from a year ago or an incident that happened a long time ago, but it's real time. And you come from a place of, here's the impact your behavior had on me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when employees are skilled in that, that's a way of leveling up the team performance and the engagement. People want to be part of it.
Yeah. I mean, so one part of what I'm hearing is, even if you are working for someone else and the company culture as a whole isn't what you want, one of the great places to start is within any team that you're working on, and that you can actually you have more access to a leader or to be able to have that conversation together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes some risk.
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage your listeners to, if this is important to them, to take some risks and have the conversation with their boss and say, I've learned about conscious culture. I can't influence the whole organization, but I feel like we can make a difference here.
Yeah. And I've actually seen that. I've seen men I've worked with have these kinds of conversations and then have a team that was really recognized as, wow, they're more effective, or they seem more cohesive, or they have higher, employee retention. And then people start wondering, well, what are they doing that's different? So it's been amazing to see that.
Yeah. And so Google has studied the heck out of this, and they've made a lot of the information available for free to the public.
Yeah.
So if you Googled RE:work under Google, you'll see all sorts of information and tools available for teams to level up themselves.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Awesome. Do you have any highlights from what you've read? One of your favorite pieces?
Well, for Google, the number one most important criteria for their successful teams is psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. So if I am safe enough to share with you feedback, if I am safe enough to challenge you, if I am safe enough to share my diverse opinion, if I can challenge and say that my experience as a woman is different than my experience as a man, or my experience at this level is different than my experience at the higher level, if you can have those honest dialogues, if you can challenge the product itself and the solutions to it, that psychological safety is a big factor in team performance.
That's powerful. Do you have a way that you help your companies create that trust and that psychological safety?
Yeah, there are different exercises around revealing more about yourself and sharing and creating some space, some safe space to be able to go, oh, okay, I did it here in this workshop, and I feel like I can do it more at work. And so we create ways for people to use what they learned in the workshop outside of work and build on furthering the psychological safety.
Fantastic. I love it. Okay. Well, what do you think from here, right? We've talked a little bit about the leadership blind spots, conscious culture. What else do you really want men to know who are listening? What feels important if we finish this conversation and we didn't talk about it?
Yeah, the interesting, what comes up first for me is, as a man, and also being part of Women in Leadership Institute, that we as men in general, not all men, don't fully understand the woman's experience at work. Be a little more sensitive and more aware. What is it like for a woman at work, and how can you support and encourage them to thrive? Because in too many organizations, that's not the case. And that's a worthy cause for all men, I believe, is to be able to, for us to create safety and assist women in furthering their work experience, and making sure that they are feeling engaged and they're able to participate, their voice is heard. And so I think that's really important men's work, to collaborate with women and understand and support them in the work environment.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. I appreciate that as a woman. And it's funny, sometimes when I hear men talk about that, I feel so appreciative. And then I also wonder if some men have the question of, well, why is that important? Or what do I get out of that? I mean, on the one hand, right, we want men, we want everybody to start thinking about like, okay, well, what's beyond just me? However, I'm wondering if you do have any kind of stats or data on what does happen when you start to be more inclusive or be more understanding of a woman or minorities' perspectives.
Yeah, it's the pure pleasure of working in a team or organization where everyone is important and everyone's voice is heard. And so whether that's just within your team, just be aware of any unconscious biases that you may have and raise those so that everybody understands them. And so that's part of the work for men.
Yeah, well, and I would imagine that there's pleasure, and I have seen research, but you might know more than I do about this, about, effectiveness and employee retention and all of those things, that actually the more inclusive teams and the more inclusive companies have more employee fulfillment and customer satisfaction, all of those things. Do you have any research on that?
Yeah, well, let me give you a story around that. That really, I think, tells the impact. And so if you take a look at two companies, Lyft and Uber, very cultures.
Oh, good. I've been fascinated by watching both of them.
Very similar service and different cultures.
Yes.
And so a woman engineer was in a class of mine, and she was curious about the job at Uber, applied to Uber. And it took her about 2 hours of going, wow, this is not for me.
Uh-huh.
You lose great talent if the culture doesn't support everyone.
Yeah.
Now, I also know Lyft. I've had a lot of conversations with the head of HR there. I do study them as an organization. That's a welcoming organization. It's a welcoming culture.
Yeah.
When I went to see the head of HR and I talked with the receptionist, she was so pumped up about being in that organization. You attract and retain the best talent possible when all voices are heard and all voices are respected.
Well, yeah. And then, right, personally, whether this is good or not, I don't use Uber anymore. I use Lyft because of all of the issues and the abuses and things that have been going on in the news with men at Uber, right? That's not to say I'll never use them again, but the impact, right, on consumers is people are watching these days more than ever.
Yeah, and there's evidence that Lyft's revenue really increased significantly in the past year.
Yeah, as a result of that.
As a result of the culture that's part of Uber's past. Now, the new CEO is trying to change that, and he's doing the best he can to move that organization in a slightly different way. But it takes a long time. It takes a good couple of years to really shift a culture.
Right. It's like turning a big barge rather than a little boat or something.
A huge barge.
Yeah.
Especially with the number of employees they have.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been amazing. I feel, as always in these podcast conversations, I feel like we could keep talking for a really long time. But I'd love for people to know where they can find you and, again, how they might at different places in an organization, right? Whether you're a CEO of a startup or you're an employee of a company, or maybe just a couple tips on how each person would actually start to implement some of these conscious culture pieces.
The place to start, the place everyone can start, is start talking to each other about it. Move it from unconscious to, let's explore what is our culture, even within what is our team culture? What is our organizational culture at any level? How do we want to be as a team? How do we want to be as an organization? So having those conversations with their peers, with their manager, would be a place to start. What's one behavior that we want to add that's not part of who we are?
I love it.
What's getting in our way? Is it conflict avoidance? That's pretty common. If we're avoiding conflict, that's going to get in our way of being successful. So the beauty of doing this work is everyone who participates is learning something. They're leveling themselves up certainly as a leader, as an individual contributor, and as a human being.
So fantastic. I keep thinking of exercises and things, right? In my world, I get really excited about the places that build trust between people and the team cohesiveness and the psychological safety. And so, I'm loving that you're giving these smaller bits or pieces, right, of how people in a bigger organization can actually start to make a difference, even if it's not going all the way to the top yet, right? That there is a pathway.
Yeah, there is a pathway.
Awesome.
Make a difference.
Good. And how can people find you if they're interested in hiring you to do some of this work?
Yeah, the website is consciousculturegroup.com, and they can email me if they'd like at russ@consciousculturegroup.com. And I'd love to chat with them if they have any interest in learning more about it. I do have an online culture class that people can sign up for and really take a deeper dive into culture that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Good being with you.
Thank you. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.